This lecture is about aggression and violence. And we're going to talk about some theories. We're going to get a little bit into the biology of it. And then we're going to really look at some statistics about how the United States and the world is actually becoming a safer place. We're going to end with some basic theories of why people become aggressive and why people become violent. So let's look at a little biology here. Let's try to understand it in the role of evolution, of natural selection, of ecology. You know, animals have to do a lot to protect their resources, to fight for mates, to protect themselves. And we can look at a lot of different animal models for aggression and think about, well, what natural selection influences created those aggressive behaviors. It also is going to tell us a lot about human aggression and violence. We can categorize aggression, at least we do in the literature and biology, into competitive, protective, and parental aggression. And we're going to look at each one of those. So, competition. Well, this could be competition for territory, where you live. We see this in everything from birds and beetles and of course mammals. They protect their environment against competitors. Well, you can have competition for food. You can have competition for just small space. There's also sexual competition, which is very similar, where oftentimes males are aggressive towards each other in competition for females, especially when the females are in estrus or are prepared to breed. Now this could involve actual fighting, where animals are hurting each other. But oftentimes it just involves sort of passive forms of aggression, display aggression. That can be anything from vocalizations to other things. Now this is an example of animals that actually hurt themselves. These are mountain sheep, and the males get along fine during the year. They're pretty solitary, and all of a sudden the females come into estrus and it's time to mate, and these animals will begin to hit their heads against each other. And that can be a very violent thing, and oftentimes these animals can get really hurt. You also see the evolution of the horns and the evolution of the front plate of the head, because the ones that win are the ones that get to mate. And this is a very aggressive act. But what researchers found recently is that it's not only the most aggressive one that gets mating. There are what are called satellite males. These are males that are oftentimes younger, and they back down. When one wants to fight, the other one doesn't want to fight, and the other one runs away. But the other one, this satellite male, this coward sheep, runs away and waits for the other males to hit each other in the head. And sometimes they get hurt, and sometimes they get dazed. And while they're dazed and hurt, this satellite male that didn't want to fight comes in and mates with a female. It was determined that these satellite males, these non-aggressive males, can have as many as 25% of the offspring. We see this also true with other animals, like the sea lions, where the males fight each other because they have a harem. They protect all of their females. But sometimes the non-aggressive males can also mate too. Those are the satellite males in the sea lions. So, like I was mentioning, a lot of aggression has to do with displays. This can be something as simple as the color of the animal can act as a way to forego aggression, but it can be like a behavior like the skunk lifting up their tail, or oftentimes males, especially the primates, but other mammals too, will display their tools for aggression, like their big canine teeth, or they'll puff up their arms and they'll make themselves look bigger. This is a display. The idea is that within a population of the same species, it's not the best thing for them to be killing each other. It's best to resolve a lot of the fights with just displays. You see this in wolves. Wolves can show a lot of display that looks very aggressive, but oftentimes they don't hurt each other. Now to protective aggression. This is like a protection against predators. And here's something that has been presented as ways of understanding differences in aggression. The question is there a difference between offensive aggression, an animal choosing to attack another animal, and defensive aggression, which can be just as violent, but where the animal doesn't choose to do this, would rather run away? Both involve injury, both involve arousal in the sympathetic nervous system, but they may differ in many ways. So when I was at the University of Hawaii, I had two researchers that were on my dissertation committee. They weren't my direct advisor, but I worked with them a lot. Carolyn and Bob Blanchard, and they did a lot of work on aggression in animals and theories of aggression. So what happens is they take rats, male rats and female rats, and they put them into a colony, and they're all living together and everything's fine. And then you might take another male rat and put it into the colony, and the dominant male rat of that colony that lives there will start showing aggression towards the intruder. Now, the dominant male that lives in that colony will show offensive aggression. It will run towards that new male, especially if the male is sexually mature, and will begin to attack it. And it will attack it in very specific places. This is an offensive aggression. It will attack it on its back, on its neck, and it will try to cause wounds to the back and the neck. The other animal that came in, it wants nothing to do with this aggression. Okay, it's entering, it wants nothing to do with this aggression, and it wants to run away. But maybe it can't run away. Maybe it's enclosed in this colony. And it will show what's called defensive aggression. And that's where its targets will go right at the face. It'll jump at the other animal's face and run away. We see this type of defensive aggression if a cat attacks a mouse. If a dog attacks a cat, the cat will jump at the dog's face. So these are ways of looking at differences just on the behavioral components. We also know that different parts of the brain are involved. Different parts of the brain are involved in offensive aggression and defensive aggression. There's a lot of different motivations going on here, and we also see different parts of the brain involved, especially in an area called the periaqueductal gray. We have different areas will determine whether that animal is offensively aggressive or defensively aggressive. But it's also true that offensive aggression can be rewarding to an animal. It's something they want to do and they will work towards doing. We also see this in human beings when we find people that are aggressive towards other people because they want to be. They're not just defending themselves, they're attacking their spouse, attacking their children, attacking another person. They find it appetitive, a reward. Now they might later say, oh, I felt bad about doing this horrible thing, but while they're doing it, they admit it is a rewarding thing to have an aggression towards another person. And as we know, defensive aggression, if you've ever been attacked by somebody, you know that's a terrible thing. You want nothing to do with it. So let's look at the rats again. So here, up here, is the invading male rat. He was put in there. He doesn't belong to the colony. He's a threat. Here is the dominant male rat. The rat that lives in this colony protects its females. And then they get into this fighting. They'll chase him. A dominant will chase the intruder, offensive, defensive. But once they get to a point where he's cornered, they get into what's called a boxing position. And again, these are different rats, but one rat is going to be trying to get to the back of another. The dominant tries to get to the back of the other. Doesn't try to bite his face, doesn't try to bite his stomach. See that? Well, in this case, the white one is the dominant. It's circling around and trying to get to the back. That's a dominant aggression. The subordinate goes for the face or goes for the stomach. That's the defensive. Why this is interesting is because the Blanchards worked for a very long time on trying to understand if it's possible to create animal models for human aggression. and ways of treating that. Let's say somebody is offensively aggressive. They're going to end up in jail. They're really bad people. Well, are there pills you can give them? Is there pharmaceutical? Is there training? Well, one of the first things that they looked at was make a rat aggressive, give them certain types of drugs, anxiolytics and other things, and see if that aggression stops. The problem is all the animal models were using defensive aggression. They would shock the animal's feet. They would do things to make the animal very scared, and the animal would bite things. And then you give him drugs and say, oh, does he stop biting things? Well, what it turns out is you're doing a lot for defensive aggression with these pills and these pharmaceuticals, but nothing for offensive aggression, because these are different behaviors, motivations, and parts of the brain, and whether it is appetitive, a good thing, or a really bad thing. So I did some work in this area just for a little while. I did some work on looking at Siamese fighting fish. Now here are animals that guard territory. These are animals that guard mates, and they love to fight each other, these males, and they'll kill each other if they give the chance. Well, I put a plexiglass between them, and I wanted to look at their reaction to each other. This is a display. He's displaying aggression. Okay, this is a gill display right here, and this other animal is swimming back and forth. That's also an aggression. What I did was I had this fish learn to go through a maze to get to this fish. And if he took a right on the maze, he would get nothing. And if he took a left on the maze, he got to fight. And then we looked at some other components, and what they did was we found that they learned where to go. He wanted to fight. He wanted to go there and show aggression. He found it rewarding. Okay, now to parental aggression. Well, this kind of overlaps with protective aggression because the parent is protecting a resource, and that resource, in this case, that resource is an offspring. Predatory aggression is much more common towards the young compared with the adults. In other words, when a lion is going after a zebra, it goes after the young. It doesn't go after the adult's going to hurt him. They always go after the young because they're an easier prey. And the adults have to defend these predators. So what contributes to parental aggression? Let's think about this. This is kind of an interesting picture, a little baby monkey and a dog coming after him, and there's the protective parent. So let's think about some factors that contribute to this type of aggression. The levels of parental aggression has a correlation with several things, a positive correlation. Well, if we look at the level of commitment of the aggression by the parent, it is correlated positively with the age of the offspring. Let me give you an example. Let's say a rat has some pups and a predator comes in and the rat has just had the pups. The pups aren't that old. They will show less aggression towards protecting those pups than if the pups are, let's say, 10 days old or 20 days old or 40 days old. The idea here is the animal has put in a lot of resources into raising these young. And if the pups were just born, the female rat can go back into estrus and have more pups quickly. But if she's already put a lot of time into these pups, it might be more evolutionarily important to protect those animals than to try to make new pups. It's all kind of a balance. Those animals involved with long and costly parental care show a lot of aggression. If you can just have pups right away, like rats, that's not going to show the same level of aggression as maybe a primate or a whale or something where you're looking after these offspring for years. Elephants will look after their offspring for a very long time. And so elephants are more aggressive towards predators than, let's say, an animal that can have pups right away or offspring right away, like rabbits or mice. And then, how often does this animal come back into estrus? How often can this female have offspring? Now, some animals can only come into estrus once or twice a year. Some, like humans, about once a month, and other animals maybe even every couple days. So that aggression will determine how often you can have offspring again. if it's a long time before you can have offspring again, that animal, that species of animal will be more aggressive. You see this type of parental aggression the highest in birds and mammals. Reptiles and other things don't show this to this degree. So let's talk about human aggression and violence. Oh boy, we see this all over the news. We talk about it all the time. We're sure we live in this horrible, violent society because we see it all the time. And this is certainly going to be a part of people's motivations. So, let's think about this question. The world is much more dangerous than it was in my parents' times. Think about that. Think about the answer to that right now. It's more dangerous today than it was when your parents were your age. What are you putting down? True or false? Well, the answer is false, and false by a lot. We're actually in the safest society we've ever lived in. Actually, the world is safer. And we have less violence and less attacks and less abductions than we ever have. And we don't think that. Most people don't think that because we see on the news every day somebody getting hurt. Well, that's how news works. If you have violence happening here, they're going to show it. If it's not, give me the town over. Give me the city over. Show me somewhere in Europe where people were attacked. Show the violence, and we get this idea that this happens all the time. This is an interesting book. This book actually came out about 2001, I believe. But it was all about why we fear the wrong things and why we're so certain we live in this very violent society when we really don't. So this was some statistics I just pulled from this book. It said, between 1990 and 1998, the nation's murder rate declined 20%. In other words, we became a safer society. But the number of murder stories reported in the news, not the number of murders, but the number of reports of murders or reporting of violence went up 600%. This is the idea that people think we're in a terribly violent place because we see it all over the news, but things decline. Youth violent crime has fallen ever since 1990. We are less likely to be victims of violent crime today than 20 years ago. By a lot. This is also a very good book on the issue. He goes through the whole history of this, and if you don't want to read his book, it's a big, thick book, you can always watch his TED Talk. Go to TED and type in Steven Pinker, and he covers this topic. He lays out the idea. Let's look at the statistics. Let's look at the numbers. Let's follow what's happening in the United States and the world. And he says we are in a much safer society than we've ever been. So this is one of the graphs that comes out of his book. And it just looks at the number of wars in the world. Worldwide battle deaths per 100,000 people. This gives us that kind of ratio. Well, during the 1940s, we had World War II. Okay, we're getting into Korean War. We're getting into Vietnam War into the 60s. Look at this. But look at the 2000s. I know we see war on the news every day, and there's always something happening somewhere, this war breaking out. And these are very terrible, tragic things. But you have to understand, you're less likely to be involved in these things than you ever have. And yet we dump tons of money into military when we should be dumping money into things that really save people's life, like reducing heart disease and things. So I went around and I found some statistics online. This is from the Bureau of Justice. This is violent crimes and serious violent crimes, and look at this decline since 1993. Look at this percentage drop. That's tremendous. The Pew Center for Research on Statistics, they have a wonderful website and a great article and PDF, and I kind of went through that and I just looked at some of the things they were talking about. Victims per 100,000 people, for every 100,000 people, age 12 and older of nonviolent crimes. Again, we get this big decrease. This is rate of non-fatal violence from firearm crime, males and females, much higher back in 1993. This is 1 in 100. Look at this tremendous drop. Again, we don't think this, do we? we think about the violence in our society. This is looking at the different age group. 18 up here, 18 to 24, 25 to 40. Look at, even this has a drop. Even these have drops. I mean, it never was very high in older people, but the younger people, the drop is tremendous. And if we look at some of these individually, these are just crime rates that have dropped since the 1990s. Firearm homicide deaths dropped 60%. Okay, non-fatal violent firearm crimes dropping. Not all non-fatal violent crimes dropping. The only statistic I found that increased when I read this article was the amount of people that die when there are mass shootings. Okay, so we see these in the news, and this terrible thing happened in this school or this movie theater, and these are terrible things. The numbers that die in those events increase. And that, I think, has a lot to do with the types of weapons used. Rate of firearm homicide deaths. Yet one of our great motivators, or maybe a better way of saying it, one of the great things that stops our motivation, that keeps us from doing things, is this fear of human aggression. That person over there, that person that looks different than me, that creepy guy, that whatever. I'm not saying people don't need to be vigilant. I'm not saying violence doesn't happen. It does. I'm just saying it happens less likely than I think we think it does. And that might impede our behavior. It certainly impedes our relationship with our fellow human beings on this planet. We've spent over $100 billion per year on the criminal justice system in the United States. That's billion with a B. In the past 30 years, the cost of the federal prison system has increased 1,700%. That's a percent. We have gone from a prison system that was very taxing on our finances 30 years ago to a balloon, to an overwhelming, even though violent crimes have gone down. In California, we spend more on prisons than we do on higher education. Think about that. Think about your tuition going up and going up and going up, and how much money we spend on keeping people in prison. Here's some budgets I found for 2012. $7.9 billion budget for California prisons alone. That's an average of $47,421 to keep a prisoner in prison for a year. That's more than it keeps you to be in college per year. Even room and board and everything. That's less than it takes to keep somebody at Stanford or MIT, some of the most expensive colleges. This is a misappropriation of funds as far as I'm concerned. Look at the incarceration rates from 1920 to 2006. Okay? Really, really increased. Real big increase in this. Most of these are drug-related offenses. We're number one in the nation, in the world, in terms of over 700 people per 100,000 are incarcerated. This is pulling people out of society. And again, I understand keeping violent people in prisons, but also we keep drug offenders and people with minor infractions. We spend a tremendous amount of money on prisons. By the way, I need to point out that violence against people is not only dropping in the United States. We can't just say it's because we're sticking everybody in prisons. This is a worldwide phenomenon of drop of aggression. So let's look at human aggression. It's any behavior directed towards another individual that is with the immediate proximate intent to cause harm. Aggression must intend harm by their action. An aggressor, Violence is aggression that produces extreme harm. It's just an extreme version. So we can break these down into different types of aggression. We have hostile aggression. This is impulsive, unplanned, driven, explosive, attack without thinking, reactionary. And then we have instrumental aggression. This is aggression towards other people where it's premeditated, it's thought about. There's an ultimate goal. That goal can be to do harm. That goal can be to oppress people. Could have immediate goals, I'm planning on doing this, or ultimate goals. Ultimate is in the future, proximate is now. So this is an article. Now, I think it lays out some of the basic theories of aggression. The article came out in 2002. That was a while ago, but I think it's a good summary of aggression. So I'd like you to read this and look at the different theories, learn about the different theories, and then look at their aggression model, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. Here are their theories, and I'd like you to go and read about it. There's the cognitive knee association theory. Cognitive knee association theory. And here's the theory behind this aggression. It's caused by frustration. It's caused by irritation. It's caused by annoyances. Even raising the temperature increases this type of aggression. These negative effects, these negative feelings, these negative circumstances lead to this aggression. So you have this fight or flight response leads to the cognitive realization that these emotions are going on, which leads to the act. So this type of aggression, cognitive knee association theory, association between the event and the emotional and cognitive responses experienced during the event. So you're getting angry, you're getting frustrated, you're getting irritated. You cognitively look at those things and say, now I'm angry, now I'm mad, now I'm feeling those emotions. This is the theory where people just get pissed off. This is the road rage kind of stuff. This is the I'm irritated, I'm angry, and that builds up, and then the aggression happens. 2 is the social learning theory. Famous Bandura study on the Bobo dolls, which we'll look at in a second. Aggression is learned through experience and observation. We learn to be aggressive because that's the way we were trained. It's good for also understanding instrumental aggression. So here's a child, and the child has an aggressive parent, and the parent wants them to do something, and if they don't do it, they hit them, and they yell at them. This is learned, right? So the kid, when the kid grows up, this is how they deal with people. This is how they deal with their children to get things. To get things they want, you must be aggressive. Okay, this is that transference kind of stuff. So there's Albert Bandura. And this is he did a lot of versions of these Bobo doll studies, lots of versions, but I'm going to give you one. So children watching a video, or actually they watched adults beating up a Bobo doll. That's a Bobo doll. It's a little toy that you hit and it bounces back. It's kind of made for hitting. And they watched these videos, and at the end of the videos, they had 3 possible outcomes that the kids watched. In one group, the people were rewarded. They'd beat up the doll, and then somebody would come in and go, "Good job. That's what you're supposed to do. Way to go." And another, they were punished. That was bad. You shouldn't have hit Bobo. And the third, there were really no consequences. And here are the results. Okay, the imitation of what the children of what they did, we see a lot more aggression in the boys. The boys watched and did this. If the people were punished, the girls would drop that, but the boys would drop it too if they were punished for the behavior. If there was no consequences, they'd just go in there and start beating up the doll. But if they were rewarded, that's even better. But mostly they just went in and beat up the doll. The only time we get a little drop is if the parent was scolded for it. But not that big of a drop. Look at those little violent boys. Finally, there's, not finally, but third, we're going over 5, there's the script theory. This is when children observe violence in the media. Okay? So they're watching violent TV shows, they're playing violent games like Grand Theft Auto. And the idea here is the child scripts out their life like they script out a TV show or a game. This is a more detailed version of social learning, but they're learning oftentimes through media. So here's an experiment that was done in 2003. 329 adults who were initially surveyed as children in the late 1970s. They were asked a bunch of questions. Well, what kind of TV shows do you watch? They were asked. How often do you watch these programs? And they found that men who had scored in the top 20% on childhood exposure to violence were about twice as likely as the other men to have pushed, grabbed, or shoved their wives during an argument in the year preceding the interview. In other words, what they're saying is if you watched a lot of violence when you were a kid, you were more likely to script your life in that way. It was also true for women. In terms of their reaction to the husband. But here's the question. I mean, this is the question, this is the circular question we always have to ask. Were these children drawn to the violent games or violent TV shows because it was in their nature? They were drawn to those shows, and that's their nature, and that's how they act towards people. In other words, did the TV shows cause them to be violent, or were they kind of violent people to begin with, and they like violent shows, and they like to be violent to their peers? So, you know, I think that a lot of evidence comes down on the idea that, you know, playing some of these games don't necessarily cause children to be violent. It might desensitize them to a certain degree. There are probably good age-appropriate games, but I think they're going to go back and forth on whether watching violence causes violence. Number 4, the excitation transfer theory. This is where physiological arousal from an event dissipates slowly. In other words, you get pissed off and then you calm down. Now, if you haven't calmed down and another event happens, then it builds. I'm pissed off, then something else happens, and then I get even more pissed off. If two arousing events are separated by a short amount of time, I get pissed off, I'm angry, and I don't have a break, and then I'm angry about something else, that can build up to a point where finally somebody acts out that aggression. This transfer can take place over an extended period of time if associations are made. In other words, you come to this place and there's somebody who's very rude there, and you associate this place with this event of being rude. You might go home, calm down, come back to this place, and that can be reinstated. You can be upset again just by coming back and associating this place with bad service or bad people or whatever. And then if an event happens, it's already built up because of the association. Finally, there's the social interaction theory. This theory is the idea that aggression has a purpose for these people. Okay, they're violent to get money, to get services, to get sex, to get safety, to exact justice. It is instrumental in getting something, to establish a self-identity, to boost self-confidence. It is not just spontaneous, it's not bursting out, it's not, it is purpose-driven. That purpose can be really bad. I mean, to boost one's self-esteem, but the aggression and the aggressive act is goal-oriented. This is that instrumental kind of aggression. So we went through those 5 basic theories, okay? So this is an example of the social interaction theory. By the way, this isn't a robbery, it's just a coercive borrowing. Ultimate goal of getting money. We're going to go over some other theories of aggression in the next lecture.